The movie starts with an aerial shot of the ocean. A man is swimming when he spots an old rusted trunk underwater. He swims closer, curious. Suddenly, the trunk opens and something floats out, a green mask. The mask rises to the surface and the scene cuts away. We're introduced to Stanley, a sweet, innocent guy who works at a bank. One day, he approaches his female colleague and says, "Hey, I've got 2 tickets to a show. Would you like to go with me?" The woman smiles and says, "Oh, that sounds fun. You know, my friend's been dying to see that. Would you mind giving me both tickets so I can take her?" Stanley, being too nice for his own good, hands over both tickets and doesn't even go himself. After she leaves, his best friend Charlie shows up and tells him, "Stanley, man, everyone just uses you. You gotta stand up for yourself." Later at work, a woman named Tina comes into the bank. She introduces herself to Stanley, saying she wants to open an account. She places her handbag on the desk and starts chatting with him. But something feels off. The camera zooms in on her bag, and we see a tiny hidden camera inside, recording the entire bank. Turns out, Tina was sent by her partner in crime to case the place because they were planning to rob it. Of course, Stanley doesn't know any of this. To him, Tina is just the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. He gushes about her to Charlie later, saying, "Wasn't she amazing?" Charlie brushes him off, saying, "Forget about her, man. There's a party tonight. Let's go." Stanley agrees, but he remembers his car is broken. He heads to the auto repair shop, but the mechanics tell him it'll take a while to fix. They give him a clunky, beat-up loaner car instead. It's barely running, but Stanley drives it to the party anyway. When he gets to the party, the bouncer doesn't let him in. Turns out he wasn't even on the guest list. Embarrassed and upset, Stanley drives back home. On the way, he pulls over near the river to cool off. As he looks into the water, he thinks he sees a dead body floating. Stanley, being the kind-hearted guy he is, climbs down to check if the person is still alive. But when he gets closer, he realizes it's not a body at all. It's just some debris stuck together. However, as he's about to leave, he notices something floating nearby. It's the same green mask from the beginning of the movie. Thinking it looks unique and antique, Stanley takes the mask home. When he gets there, his dog starts barking like crazy at the mask. Animals have that weird sixth sense, you know? But Stanley brushes it off. Curious, he stands in front of his mirror, holding the mask. "Let's see how this looks on me," he says, but the moment he puts it on, the mask latches onto his face. It won't come off. It feels like it's merging with his skin. His entire face turns green, and suddenly, Stanley starts acting different. He's moving at superhuman speed, dancing around and acting totally wild. His apartment becomes a whirlwind of chaos. When he steps out of his room, his neighbor, an older woman, sees him and screams. She's wearing a green face mask herself, for skincare. But Stanley's appearance is so terrifying, she freaks out. The woman tries to defend herself, but Stanley starts bouncing around like a human cartoon, jumping out of a window like it's no big deal. By now, Stanley has completely transformed into a wacky, over-the-top version of himself. Stanley, now fully transformed with the green mask, steps outside and ends up in the middle of the road. A car screeches to a halt in front of him, and the driver starts honking furiously. Stanley smirks, reaches into his pocket, and pulls out a tiny ball-shaped horn. At first glance, it looks like a harmless little toy, but when Stanley presses it, the sound is so deafening that the car's windows shatter, and the driver's hair stands straight up from the sheer intensity of the noise. The poor guy is left in complete shock. Amused by his newfound powers, Stanley decides to swing by the auto repair shop where he had been humiliated earlier. Using his cartoonish abilities, he wreaks havoc, swapping tools, turning things upside down, and causing total destruction. Satisfied, he heads back home, feeling like he's finally gotten some revenge. The next morning, Stanley wakes up and finds his face is back to normal. The mask is nowhere to be seen. Looking in the mirror, he starts piecing together fragmented memories of the wild things he did the previous night. "No way," he mutters. "That had to be a dream." Just as he's trying to convince himself, there's a knock at his door. It's a police officer. The cop asks if Stanley remembers anything unusual from the night before. Behind the officer stands Stanley's neighbor, the woman who had screamed at him the previous night when he was wearing the mask. "There was this thing," she says nervously, "a man with a green face. He was terrifying." Stanley realizes they're talking about him, but he plays it cool. "Nope," he lies. I was asleep all night. The officer gives him a suspicious look but leaves. Relieved, Stanley goes back into his apartment and grabs the mask. Holding it up, he mutters, "This stupid thing made me do all that crazy stuff. I'm throwing it out." He tosses the mask out the window and heads out for work. But later, when Stanley returns home, he's shocked to find the mask sitting right there in his apartment. It's as if the mask had a mind of its own. Stanley shakes his head in disbelief but ignores it for now. At work, Stanley gets scolded by his boss for being late and sloppy. Things are only getting worse for him. On his desk, he notices a piece of a newspaper featuring Tina, the woman who had come to the bank. Turns out she's a talented singer who performs at a fancy bar, the same bar Stanley had tried to get into but was thrown out of. Determined to finally make a good impression and meet Tina again, Stanley decides he needs a plan. But there's one problem. The bar is super exclusive, and he can't afford the entrance fee. Frustrated, his eyes land on the mask lying on his couch. Maybe this mask knows what I need, he thinks. Giving in to temptation, Stanley puts the mask on again. His face turns green, his energy skyrockets, and he's back to his wild, fearless self. This time he decides to rob his own bank. Why? So he can steal enough money to buy the bar pass, and maybe even the fancy car he was humiliated over earlier. Stanley, now as the mask, storms into the bank. But little does he know, Tina's criminal boyfriend and his crew are already there, planning to rob the bank themselves. They're standing outside, discussing their strategy, when suddenly, Stanley crashes through the glass doors with all the flair of a cartoon tornado. Stanley comes out and says to the group, "You took so long. That's not how you pull off a robbery." Saying this, he runs away so fast that no one can see him properly. Just then, the police arrive and start questioning Tina's companions, assuming they are the ones who robbed the bank. Meanwhile, at the bar, things take an unexpected turn. Tina's gang realizes that the person who danced with her earlier, Stanley, is the one who robbed the bank. Furious, they start shooting at him, but Stanley is incredibly quick, jumping around to avoid every shot. Suddenly, the police return to the scene and confront Tina's gang. The police say, "We saw some of your people outside the bank earlier, but we let them go. Now you're here at the bar, putting people's lives in danger. This is a serious act of violence." The police arrest Tina's gang, telling them, "If it's proven that you didn't commit the robbery, we'll let you go." The gang leader, who originally planned the heist, responds, "We'll prove it. Once you find evidence against that green-faced guy, you'll know the truth." As the police investigate, Stanley, now back at the bank, faces his boss's anger again. Stanley says, "Don't get angry with me again or it won't end well for you." Just then, Tina arrives at the bank to meet Stanley. She asks him, "You meet so many people every day. Do you know someone who has a green-painted face?" Stanley, not wanting to reveal the truth, says, "Yes, I know him. If you want, I can introduce you to him tonight." Tina, happy with this response, sets a time and place to meet. Later, at home, Stanley begins to worry about the mask and its mysterious powers. He visits someone who is knowledgeable about masks. The expert tells him a story about the mask's history and its mischievous past. One wearer of the mask was particularly playful and caused chaos everywhere. Stanley realizes he needs to understand the mask's powers fully before things spiral out of control. The expert explains to Stanley, the mask was once given to someone who lacked maturity. It was crafted to align with their mischievous and chaotic nature. Eventually, they were cast out and the mask was lost. It's possible this is the same mask, considering how old it appears. Stanley interrupts, saying, "It's not just possible, it is the same mask." He begins to realize the immense power and history behind it. The expert warns him, this mask was created for chaos. If it falls into the wrong hands, or even if you lose control over yourself, it could lead to catastrophic consequences. Stanley, now worried, responds, "I've already experienced its power. It's both incredible and dangerous. I need to figure out how to control it before it controls me, or worse, falls into someone else's hands." Determined, Stanley decides to dig deeper into the mask's origins, vowing to protect it from those who might use it for evil. However, deep down, he wonders if he can truly resist its tempting power. As a result, Stanley is sent to jail. When Tina finds out, she visits him there. Stanley tells her, "Tina, if I tell you the whole truth, I am the mask. But the mask they took from me isn't the real one. The real mask is with your so-called friend. The way he thinks, he's going to use it too. When I wore the mask, I was innocent at heart, which is why it made me more funny than dangerous. But even then, I still had those little thoughts of committing a crime. Your friend, however, is truly evil. With that mask, he won't just rob a bank. He'll loot the entire city and bring chaos everywhere. He has to be stopped." Tina, shocked, responds, "How can I stop him? I'm leaving the city, but I realize now that I was wrong. I made a mistake. Still, I can't face him." Saying this, she walks away. However, her so-called friend already knew that Tina might betray him. He sends his men after her. Meanwhile, we saw earlier that when those criminals kidnapped Stanley, his dog followed them. The little dog, still searching for Stanley, finally sneaks into the jail. He cleverly grabs the keys from the guard's belt and helps unlock Stanley's cell. Just then, a police officer enters. Stanley quickly grabs his gun, holds him at gunpoint, and escapes the jail. Meanwhile, the evil gang has kidnapped Tina. Her corrupt friend, now wearing the real mask, transforms completely. His face turns green and monstrous. Feeling invincible, he crashes a high-profile gangster party. His jealousy fuels him. He hates that other gangsters have more power than him. So when one of the top gangsters confronts him, he absorbs all the bullets shot at him, then spits them back out, killing his rival. Now, the evil masked man turns to Tina and smirks. "You were trying to run away, weren't you? Let's see you escape now." Just then, Stanley arrives. The villain looks at him, but Tina interrupts, saying, "Look at me. I realize now I was wrong. And if you're going to kill me, at least let me see your real face one last time." Tina is tricking him. The moment he removes the mask, a strong wind sweeps it up. Before anyone can react, Stanley's dog jumps and catches the mask in midair. Now, the cute little dog wears the mask and transforms into a chaotic, hyperactive, cartoonish monster. The dog zooms around, biting and attacking the villains, ripping their clothes, and causing complete mayhem. Meanwhile, Stanley fights the gang leader, throwing powerful punches. Once he knocks him out, he turns to his dog and says, "All right, buddy, my turn to wear the mask now." The scene shifts to the dog's hilarious face, now filled with mischievous energy, as he considers whether to give the mask back or keep having fun. Stanley is about to put on the mask when the villain's men arrive and start shooting at him. A bullet hits the mask, causing it to fly away. Stanley rushes forward and grabs it. He puts on the mask and transforms instantly. Despite being hit by multiple bullets, he remains unharmed. When he drinks some juice, the liquid leaks through the bullet holes in his body, making him realize he needs to act fast. Using his magical abilities, he draws a handle on the floor with the word "flight" written on it. As soon as he moves the handle, the villain is suddenly launched into the air and vanishes into the water. With the threat eliminated, Stanley rescues Tina. The police arrive, ready to arrest Stanley. However, a man in the bar steps forward and declares, "I am the mayor, and I saw everything with my own eyes. Stanley is innocent. The real villain must still be around. Catch him." At that moment, a police officer notices someone sneaking away with the mask and yells, "There he is! He's taking the mask!" The mayor sighs and says, "This is your problem. You always go after the wrong guy." The police then shift their focus and begin chasing the real culprit, letting Stanley go free. The next morning, Stanley, Tina, his dog Milo, and his best friend arrive at the same spot where he first found the mask. As he holds it in his hands, he reflects on everything it brought into his life, the incredible adventures, the chaos, and most importantly, meeting Tina. Looking at her with a smile, he says, "Because of this mask, I did some amazing things, but the best thing of all was meeting you." Instead of keeping the mask, he throws it into the water, letting it drift away. As the sun rises, Stanley and Tina walk away together, happy and free.